first speaker for the agriculture panel. They're going to kick off the conversation of agriculture and water use in a changing climate. So I believe at least Bill Parker is on Zoom. They, along with him, Bill Parker and Kelly Parker founded Pastures, a ranch in Gunnison, Colorado in 2006, after years of studying and gaining experience in livestock production, ecology, and holistic management. Along with their 3 children, they own, manage, and provide most of the labor for this family-owned business. The Parkers work to promote ecological regeneration through production of high-quality grass-fed meats while sharing their mission to create health and abundance for all. You can visit their website if you want further information, but now we'll turn it over to the Parkers for our first agricultural panel discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. Sorry I don't have the rest of my crew. Springtime's a busy time of year, and actually in the ranching and farming this time of year it involves a lot of water. So water is definitely on my mind, in my actions, pretty regular at this time. And I thought I would start my talk by a quote from Alan Savory. Alan Savory is the founder of holistic management, and I believe a man that is very gifted with being able to understand complex issues. And this is the quote: "It's not drought that causes bare ground, it's bare ground that causes drought." So it's not drought that causes bare ground, it's bare ground that causes drought. So what in the heck does that mean? I think what we are used to seeing around us in our native rangelands around, there is, especially if you're in the BLM, close to the valley floor before you get high into the forest, there is a lot of bare ground. And I have to say that is a situation that is relatively new, and I think consequently one of the reasons for increasing drought, just like Alan's saying. So and the clearest example I can give to this is that the hydrological cycle is largely what drives climate. And vegetation through evapotranspiration actually has a very, very large influence on the climate, and particularly the water cycle. So what we've learned recently, this is like part of soil science, agriculture, I think, learning, is that when a plant evapotranspires, there's a small bacteria in that droplet of water that when it goes into the atmosphere, it can more easily bind to water that can become rain. A clear example of this is Alejandro Carrillo in the Chihuahua Desert in Mexico. He's been a long-time holistic management practitioner. You know, he lives in the desert, and when you think of the desert, you think of lots and lots of bare ground, maybe a few shrub, oaks, or brush, but not very productive. Well, his ranch is more productive than a lot of our irrigated hay meadows in our valley here. And through his management, through his understanding of using animals to improve the ecosystem, to improve the water cycle, he's proven that his ranch catches more rain than all the surrounding areas of the Chihuahua Desert. And that is due to his abundance of vegetation that is evapotranspiring, and as those droplets go up into the air above his ranch, they gather with other droplets and it rains more. So I think, and we experience that here on the Van Tuyl Ranch too. I think, you know, we're surrounded by arid land, but like in the summer, as we get those monsoonal flows, it like from the air coming from the west comes over the Palisades where it's really dry, and then it hits this little bubble of irrigated ground and a lot of evapotranspiration, and we'll get rain right here where not even a mile away it won't rain. And so I just wanted to make that clear that plants are a big part of this hydrological cycle, and what we're accepting as normal in our rangelands and farmlands and are not normal. Like we are way behind in the amount of vegetation that should be here to be changing these water cycles. So I like Max there saying that, you know, agriculture, we divert 86% of the water out of the rivers. But here's the other thing. Yes, we are diverting that much water. How much water are we actually consuming? That's the bigger question that we're also learning more and more about, because that's, yes, we divert it, but like here, all of the flood irrigation, most of it recharges the underground aquifer, and then when that's really charged up, then that water slowly leaks back into the river, late flows, and keeps the river cooler and running longer with higher flows. And so this consumptive part of the equation of our diversion is, like, as producers and those that are concerned about climate, our ultimate goal is to increase our consumptive use of water as much as we can. The more plants we're growing, the more water we're evapotranspiring, the more water we're actually using. Because yes, we divert a lot, but we're using very, very, very little, like a fraction. So how do we do that? That's kind of, as managers, that's our biggest thing we can influence. And I think it starts with soil fertility, and that is a completely exciting science is soil science. Like, I graduated from Colorado State University in 2000. I studied soil science. Our entire conversations were about the chemical and physical properties of soil, and now all we talk about is the biology of soil, because it's this life inside the soil that drives the chemical and physical properties of the soil. What does that mean? That means the more life, the more bacteria, the more fungus, the more protozoa, the more things that are alive in the soil, the more things can become available from rock, breaking down minerals to make a plant available. And therefore, if you have more life, you have more nutrients available, more plants can be grown, higher production. So, you know, we don't fertilize anything with commercial fertilizer, but we want to encourage life in our soil. We do that through compost teas, through compost, manure, anything to encourage life. You know, I think the old paradigm of agriculture with pesticides and herbicides and all the sides is, what can we go out and kill? And now agriculture is about what life can we beget on our farms and ranches. And the more life that we have, the more healthy our soil, the more water holding capacity in our soil, the more plants we can grow, the more we can influence that hydrological cycle in a good way, and encourage precipitation versus drought on our landscapes. I think, you know, one classic example for me to just kind of demonstrate this thinking holistically is on our rangelands right now. One of the big battles going on is invasive species. Number one, I am a strong believer is that there is no such thing as an invasive species. You know, all plants, all people, all life are looking for their opportunity to have life and to play their role on the earth. And so, like, now we're fighting this battle of cheatgrass. Yes, cheatgrass can dominate an ecosystem, but our management has the capability of making that a good thing or not, because cheatgrass is a low succession plant. Cheatgrass can establish on bare ground. And as I started the conversation, bare ground is the cause of drought. So wouldn't we want to encourage as much plant life on the land as possible and take those early successive pioneering species like cheatgrass, let them do their thing to establish the soil to be livable for other plants, let that cycle happen, and then those other plants can move in and take place of the bare ground that is getting us into a drought cycle. So anyway, I don't know if what time is it? I'm bad about keeping track of time, so I think I have more time. So that's one big policy thing, and that's a policy. But as farmers and ranchers, we can't necessarily change policy, but we can do what we can do on the land to encourage more precipitation. And one of the biggest things is like, I am in the livestock business, so my livestock depend on growing forage, growing abundant forage. Well, springtime is always the hardest. There's 3 ways we can overgraze a plant, which overgrazing in and of itself is a huge misconception of what which we've understood for hundreds of years. Overgrazing has been believed to be a condition of number of animals. But overgrazing is a function of time, not number of animals. What I mean by that is, number one, we don't overgraze landscapes, we overgraze plants. And then if a plant is trying to grow and a grazing animal comes along to graze that plant, which that's what grazing plants evolved with, grazing animals, that plant gets grazed off, then it has to use its root reserves to get enough leaf back up to photosynthesize. If that animal comes back and that very nutritious, highly desirable, fresh regrowth is there available for an animal to graze again, it's grazed again, then we have to use roots again. And if you see how that cycle can, over time, end the roots and possibly kill that plant, or at least weaken those roots. So to limit overgrazing, we have to control the time that plants are exposed to grazing animals. So that means short duration grazing. You know, we only let animals be in a pasture for long enough that those plants won't be regrowing and the plants being regrazed while they're regrowing. But also this time of year, springtime, all plants are using their root reserves to get enough leaf material to photosynthesize. And so in the springtime, as grazers, we are going to overgraze someplace every year. So as managers, we try to change that. You know, like one year I graze a pasture in the spring. This year I want to rest that and let it grow early in the spring. You know, like on our larger landscapes like BLM, everybody's turning out on the BLM grounds right now. Those same plants are getting grazed at the same time of year every year, so they suffer from those, like, from us weakening the plants and therefore weakening our hydrological cycle. And you know, so then it's the rest period. You know, how long are we allowing plants to fully mature before we're harvesting them? And you know, there's a curve. Like, plants grow really fast, and as they start to seed out, they're not growing as much, they're not capturing as much energy from the sun, and you know, at that time they're not gonna capture more carbon. So then it's a safe time to graze. So that's what we try to do, is let plants get a little more mature before we're grazing them. So all of these things that have been a little bit misunderstood for hundreds of years as far as managing our ecosystem have very, very long-term consequences that now we understand how to reverse these consequences of desertification, because the desertification is causing the drought cycles. But we know that we can reverse these cycles, and so I am not pessimistic about the future at all. I've been on ranches all over the world where I've seen holistic management completely change those landscapes, where water is abundant, springs start flowing again, the water holding capacity is so much greater, um, that there is this drought resistance in agricultural production. Like we with organic matter, that's a way to measure carbon in the soil. Like if we can improve our organic matter 1%, that's another 26,000 gallons per acre of water storage in the soil. So I have a friend in eastern Colorado, dryland farmer, using microbiology. He's taken farm ground that's like 1% organic matter up to 6% organic matter. And and then he says once he gets up to 12%, he never worries about a drought again. So these are the kind of things that we know are possible, and that we can have drought resilience, because as it is now, we know that we're not going to be dealing with as much moisture. Just like this I watch the snowpack obviously pretty closely, and that's a big part of my livelihood. And so we had like a 95% snowpack. Things were looking good, but then like last fall, how much moisture did we have? How much vegetation did we leave on the soil surface to store that water? And those are the kind of things that we miss. And if you have bare ground and the sun is beating on it, it's going to evaporate, and there'll be no water in that soil. And so last fall was dry. We've got these dry soils, and there's just not much water from the snow melt getting into the rivers, it seems like. So we're working hard trying to irrigate now with what water we have, and trying to build our organic matter in all of our soils by keeping our soil covered with plants, by not eating everything off of it, and building this drought resilience in our operations. Does anyone have any questions? That was a lot of different thoughts. I saw one. What was the impediments of? I can't read them all.
Sorry about that. I was talking to Dr. San for a second. Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much for that presentation. I know Alexa Cooper, one of our MEM students, was working on your land with the soil health, and it was really interesting to see her presentation. And she talked about water and soil, and that was great. But we'll jump into some questions here. The first one from Sarah Johnson says, she'd be curious to hear more about how the landscapes, i.e. dry land and soil health, influence precipitation patterns. So if you have anything to say to that.
Well, it has to do with that evapotranspiration, because if the land is bare, the only thing that can happen is any moisture that is available is evaporated out. Or so just think of bare ground. If it's warmer, like it heats up warmer than ground that has some plant material that is covering that soil surface. So like the number one objective, like Gabe Brown, he's a farmer rancher that I follow a lot, and his big theme is always don't farm naked. And that means cover the soil surface. I'm sure Susan's going to talk about the same thing in her garden. We don't want to have bare exposed soil. We want to have that soil covered, because that protects from the UV radiation that can just dry that out even more. And so having that layer of cover protects any moisture that's in the soil, and it blocks the sun from from killing the microbiology too. You know, as the hotter the soil gets, the more the microbiology can die. So we want to keep that soil covered, and we want to extend our growing season of plants as much as possible. Like we do have warm seasons in Gunnison. You know, there's some blue grama grass on the range. You know, we're mostly dominated by cool seasons, but that's how we extend our growing season. This green season, this evapotranspiration season, is to have green growing plants for as long as possible throughout the season. And you know, having a living soil helps do that too, because the microbiology, they're creating their own energy and heat for when the shoulder seasons, spring and fall, when we're starting to cool off. You know, if that soil is covered with plants, if it's alive with microbiology, it has a greater chance of keeping vegetation green longer throughout the year.
Excellent. So Dr. San actually asked, what are the um, impediments to changing agriculture practices in order to create healthier soils and drought resilience? So that's cultural, scientific, or political impediments.
I think the greatest impediment to regenerative agriculture today is current farm subsidies. Um, you know, basically, we subsidize chemical corporate agriculture, and there's pennies handed out for regenerative agriculture, because ultimately corn, for example, right now the price of corn is like 3.80 a bushel. It pretty much costs those farmers more to grow it than they're getting paid for the crop, but they still do it over and over again on the most acres in this country. So that should tell you that there's something fishy going on there, and it's subsidizing. So, you know, that's the biggest impediment in my mind, because economically, you know, if you can encourage soil fertility on your farm or ranch biologically, you don't need to go pay some corporation for that fertility, so it's going to be more profitable. But we have these systems in place that are encouraging not very regenerative agriculture through crop subsidies and crop insurance.
Yeah. So Brett McMill asked, if overgrazing is determined by the time spent on one plant, then would a variety of grazers reduce grazing pressure? I know Parker Pastures has sheep and cattle and horses. What is your experience there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I understand it right, but yeah, like different animals will eat different things. And so, yeah, like we have sheep and cows, but we're on irrigated fields, so they're mostly eating the same thing. You know, like the sheep will browse more and then the cattle will. But, you know, that timing, overgrazing, a function of time, it doesn't matter the species, because they can all eat what the other ones are eating. And so, yeah, we want to get the animals to graze it. And before that plant is growing back, we want those animals off, so then it can grow back to its full maturity, or at least to higher energy, because that's truly what we are as farmers and ranchers, are solar farmers. And the bigger solar panels of leaves that we have facing the sun, the more energy we're capturing, and the more wealth that we're creating. Because that is another huge misconception in our culture today, is that we can print wealth from a printing press, when in fact that is not true. The only wealth of any civilization is either agriculture, mining, or from the sea. So, you know, if we are desertifying our lands and lessening the ability to create wealth from them, we are losing wealth. We're losing value in our communities. And so by increasing that, that's how we build true wealth in communities.
Excellent. Juan Madrid asked, how can we encourage other large-scale farmers and ranchers to adopt these holistic land management strategies?
That's a question that I struggle with all the time, actually, and I don't know the answer. I think a lot of ranches and are subsidized in one way or another, whether that's increasing land values in a developing region, whether that's an offsite job, or anyway, most agriculture enterprises are subsidized, and so the economic incentive isn't because I know if you're farming and ranching regeneratively, it can be more profitable. Um, but I don't know. I think people have to understand what is working for them, and what the options are of doing better. And like I said, before, I think a lot of our programs that we have in place are actually keeping people locked in, because if a guy that wanted to do cover crops and really try to change his operation and build soil health, um, there will be things in the protocol that he needs to do to build that soil health that won't be approved by his crop insurance. And so he doesn't want to farm without the crop insurance. So it's safer to just do the status quo and not change the way he's doing it, because then he'd lose that back of the crop insurance or the subsidy. So, that's always my hope, is like, let's put agriculture on a level playing field, and I guarantee you the regenerative practices, the holistic management, those will be the dominant enterprises.
Great. I have a little bit of a long question here from Jess. She says, Bill, I'm a little concerned about your comments about cheatgrass, as the research I have seen suggests that it is even greater threat when it occupies degraded bare ranch land niches and converts those lands to cheatgrass monoculture that can still be grazed, but are detrimental for all grazing animals. Can you help me understand what information you are using to consider cheatgrass as a benefit to regenerative processes?
Cool. Thank you, Jez. I knew somebody was going to jump on me for that. I was hoping. Um, because what we don't change when, like, I know that like Nevada is the area where we're looking at and saying, oh boy, if we don't take care of this cheatgrass, it's all going to be covered in cheatgrass, and that'll be the only plant. But the management has never changed. Like, say out in Nevada, out on that desert country, if it's still being grazed, it is a very low stocked, widely dispersed grazing. There is no high intensity, short duration grazing. There is no, like, think of a buffalo herd being chased by uh, by wolves. That's the kind of impact that these grasslands actually need. And so in these desert environments that we're dealing with here, the cheatgrass, it will find places that, maybe there's a little more moisture or something, and it starts to establish. And then, if we don't graze it, like, I have friends, we don't do it much here because most of the cheatgrass is on the BLM grounds, and the BLM is dictating the grazing periods. But other friends in parts of the country, that cheatgrass, it's always the earliest plant to come on. That's what I'm talking about, extending this growing season and having green plants for longer. Cheatgrass is one of the best examples of that. It comes on early. So let's get the animals out there and graze it before it goes to seed. And then we still have those roots working in the soil that are helping establish for other plants to come in. And we're not letting the cheatgrass just grow and seed out and then, yes, become more and more dominant. Like, we have to change the management of these landscapes in a dramatic way if we want dramatic changes. By trying to cheatgrass as cheatgrass is a symptom of the problem. It is not the problem itself. And until we can look and figure out the root causes of these quote unquote problems that we're seeing in our environment, we have to get to the root cause. Otherwise, we're still hitting ourselves in the head with a hammer and taking Advil thinking we're going to get rid of the headache. And
Great.
so it really comes down to management. in changing that. And cheatgrass on well-managed ranches that I've seen throughout the West, where there is cheatgrass, it's never dominating. But yes, it is the ranchers that are savvy are saying, thank you, God, for this early season cheatgrass, the first green plant out there after my cattle have been starving for green all winter.
All right, I will apologize just for making the mistake of saying grazing animals when she was asking about native animals, native species. But I think you did a good job addressing that briefly as well. So we have 2 minutes left. I will say one more question. Sam asked, does ranching hurt the living soil at all, or does it help?
It depends on the management. You know, it's kind of like ranching can be very detrimental to the soil, or ranching is the best tool we have to improve the soil on a large scale. So it depends on the management.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill, for that great presentation. Looks like we're almost out of time, but we'll switch over to a quick break before we return and hear from, let's see, after the break, we'll hear from Sue Wyman from Gunnison Gardens. So we'll take a quick break, 12:45 to 1 o'clock. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.